Hello, I'm Jenny George and I'm the CEO of Converge International. I'd love to talk with you today about psychological safety and how you can promote it and ensure that it's happening in your workplace. Psychological safety is a complicated expression and not everyone always knows exactly what it means or how to interpret it. It's not really about mental health or mental illness per se. Psychological safety is about having an environment in your workplace where people feel free to take risks and they trust each other. In fact, thinking of it as a high trust culture might be a really good way and a shorthand way of perhaps thinking about what psychological safety means. I think there's a number of aspects to psychological safety that are good to bear in mind, and I'm going to talk about 4 of them in particular. The first is respect. A psychologically safe culture is one where people feel respected and they respect others. The second is honesty. You can't trust and you can't have psychological safety unless you feel that communication is open, transparent, and fundamentally honest. You can trust what people say because they're telling you the truth. The third aspect of psychological safety is a forgiving culture, or a culture in which mistakes are taken as learning opportunities and not an opportunity for blame or for punishment. There's a great story about this where an executive has made a multi-million-dollar mistake and they walk into their boss's office and say, "Oh, look, I know you're going to fire me and I'm really sorry." And their boss says, "What do you mean I'm going to fire you? I've just given you $1 million worth of training." That's a great example of a learning mindset, and one in which you can imagine when that story becomes known in that organization, people feel so much more free to talk about their mistakes and to forgive the mistakes and take it as a learning opportunity for improvement. The fourth aspect of a psychologically safe culture is one in which we are consistent. It's all very well from time to time to exhibit respect or honesty, to have a learning mindset, but if that's not maintained consistently, if people can't rely on that culture being the way that things are going to operate every day, day in, day out for the long term, they're not going to feel safe either. So just thinking about it, respect, honesty, learning mindset, consistency, they're what build a psychologically safe culture. There are quite a lot of reasons why you'd want a psychologically safe culture. For me, as a worker in an environment, it's so much less energy. I have to expend so much less energy having lower defenses if I feel safe in the environment. I don't need to feel suspicious or cynical. I don't need to worry about whether or not the things that I say might be taken out of context or used against me. In that environment, I'm going to enjoy my work more. And that's going to mean a lot of things. It's going to mean less turnover. That's a direct cost that the organization saves. It's going to mean less sick days. It's going to mean higher engagement. The other things that it's going to mean, ironically, is less physical injuries. Think about their owning up to mistakes or being willing to say something that might seem a bit unpopular. In an environment where someone feels free to say, "You know what, I made a bit of a mistake on that machine the other day and I think it needs reservicing because I'm not sure that it's quite working as it should," that's going to be a physically safer environment, as well as an environment where people feel mentally safe to talk about things. Also, being just willing to own up to times when perhaps you're not feeling at your best either mentally or physically is also going to result in a safer environment. So there's lots of reasons why psychological safety pays off for workplaces. I also just wanted to talk about the spillover from a high trust, psychologically safe culture, not just for workers, not just for the company's costs, but also for clients, for suppliers, for those external relationships. A culture in which employees trust each other is a culture in which they are also going to extend that same kind of trust relationship to external parties as well. And those are environments where clients feel like they can trust what the organization says, and they're likely to be much more loyal and stick with the company for longer. It's also an environment where people are going to feel like they don't need to rework or recheck or triple check the things that their colleagues do or that employees do, because they know in this environment people will own up, they'll keep their deadlines, they'll be respectful. And so this has so many long-lasting benefits all across the board that psychological safety is not just something that you should put on your OH&S calendar and do once a year, although that's a great idea, but it's also something that should be at the heart, the bedrock of the way the company thinks about the culture that it's trying to create. Here at Converge, we've given a lot of thought to how behaviours interact with culture. And I'd like to talk you through a little model that we've built and that we think is helpful in this regard. So there are a number of different cultures that an organisation can have, and two of them that you can see in this diagram are really stable. The affirming culture, which is everything we've been talking about psychological safety. The affirming culture is one in which respectful behaviours, those behaviours of honesty, of open communication, of respectful interaction, all of those behaviours reinforce the high trust, high safety culture that the organisation has created. So that's really stable, that affirming culture. And of course, that's where every organisation would love to be. The other really stable culture, unfortunately, is the toxic culture. And that's where behaviours of disrespect, behaviours where people are not honest with each other, where there's suspicion, give rise to a culture in which people don't trust each other, in which they can't rely on what their colleagues say, in which they double and triple check everything. That culture, unfortunately, is also very stable because the low trust is reinforcing the poor behaviour, and the poor behaviour is giving rise to the low trust. What about the other two? What we see with forgiving culture is one in which an affirming culture, and that's usually where it starts, has unfortunately slipped a little bit. And so from time to time, behaviours that are not so great have been occurring. But because there's high trust, because there's a long, stable history of trust in that organisation, there is the opportunity for forgiveness. So something may not happen right, and yet for at least a while, the culture will say, oh, okay, look, sometimes people do the wrong thing and let's give them a bit of a chance. Let's see whether or not, this behaviour can be rectified. But a forgiving culture is unstable. It doesn't last forever because over time, if the behaviours are consistent and repeated and are poor and disrespectful, that culture will slide into the toxic culture. The other final culture, which is also unstable, is the suspicious culture. Now, this is where something has been toxic for a long time and people have got used to and become cynical about the organisation and their colleagues. And then a manager and in fact a whole organisation may try really, really hard and they may want to get back to that beautiful affirming culture which has so many benefits to it. But I need to tell you, and if you're sitting out there and you're hoping to make this transition, the transition from toxic to affirming is not a straight line. It almost inevitably has to go through a suspicious culture. And that's because for a while, even when behaviours are right, even when respect is there, even when people are honest with their communication, unfortunately, the toxicity of the previous culture can't be erased in a heartbeat, and people are going to be suspicious for a while. It's the consistency and the sticking with it through that suspicion and the dogged determination to just keep portraying and displaying those correct behaviours that will eventually see the culture get back to the affirming culture, which produces all those great benefits from psychological safety. Now, you might think that diagnosing which culture you're in is a relatively easy thing to do, and it's true for your immediate team. You will know how much trust there is and you will know what behaviours look like. But you know what? It's surprisingly difficult to diagnose culture for a team that you're not personally involved in day to day. And there is a reason for that, and that is that a toxic culture, unfortunately, one of its features is that people are really scared to speak up. They don't want to tell other people because they'll get blamed, there'll be punishment. All the things about a toxic culture will make it quite difficult for you to necessarily see it when it's occurring in different parts of the organisation. And if you're a manager, that means that trying to understand what cultures look like in your teams is not actually a straightforward exercise. So how do you do it? Of course, there's a variety of ways. Simply talking to people and asking them is a good first step. but it's not necessarily going to get to the heart of what you're trying to find out, because toxic cultures can be quite persistent and they can be difficult to see if people are scared and don't want to talk to you about them. So third parties are really helpful here. Of course, engagement surveys are useful. There are also those kind of canaries in the coal mine, which is things like sick leave and turnover, which can give an indication that something's not right and it's not healthy in a particular area of your business. Your EAP stats and the kinds of things that EAP reports can give you can also give a bit of an indication that something's not quite right. It's interesting, that even just one or two people indicating that there's harassment or bullying in a team is probably worth being quite serious about investigating. And that's because toxic cultures are often quite hidden, and when you see something, it's probably the tip of an iceberg. And there's probably a lot more under the surface that needs investigation. So even if you only see one thing happening, or if you only have one brave soul who comes and talks to you about an issue, do take it seriously, because you just don't know what the breadth and depth of the problem might be that you are seeing this very tiny indicator of. So there's some ways that you can diagnose a toxic culture, and if you're in a situation where you think there might be something going on and perhaps more needs to be done to investigate it, you can do it yourself, or you can get someone to help you. One of the things that at Converge we do is team assessments, and that's where we go into a team, and as a third party, we often find that people are more willing to talk about what's happening, and we can get a really good picture of the psychological safety of that team and how the psychological interactions are occurring. And that can give organisations a really good external picture of what's happening in that team and what sorts of things might improve the situation. Well, of course, the million-dollar question is, how do you change culture? This is something that libraries full of books have been written on, and there's no way that in the next 30 seconds or a minute that I can give you anything other than the briefest overview. But basically, the thing to understand about culture is you can't change culture, you can only change behaviour. And culture flows from and is the result of consistent behaviour over time. So just as we talked about before, we're getting from a toxic culture to an affirming culture goes through this suspicious culture, because you change behaviour first and eventually the consistency of that behaviour gives rise to a change in culture. That's exactly what you have to do. So thinking through what are the behaviours that you need to see and how can you encourage those behaviours in your organisation. The behaviours are respect, the behaviours are honesty, the behaviours are being willing and able to ask for forgiveness. That's one of the most powerful things that leaders can do, because it shows that they make mistakes, that they ask for forgiveness, and that this is a permission-giving environment. And consistency. In a suspicious culture, people are looking for consistency, and they are absolutely razor edged, and they will hone in on any inconsistency as being an indicator that the toxic culture hasn't really changed. So you have to be so dedicated to consistent behavioural change all the way through that that's the only way that you're going to get from a suspicious culture to an affirming culture. We'd love to help you with culture change. There are a number of training programs that we have. We have a program called It's a Matter of Respect. There's some things that we can do to help with coaching leaders. Come talk to us here at Converge. We are passionate about culture. We're passionate about behaviour and understanding how psychology interacts with behaviour, and we'd love to chat more with you.